Well, protesters in Pittsburgh are demanding justice after the acquittal of a white police officer in the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager. 17-year-old Antoine Rose Jr. was shot 3 times as he ran away during a traffic stop last summer. Demonstrators marched in the streets over the weekend to protest the verdict. Some believe that race was a factor in the shooting.
An analysis of nearly 100 million traffic stops across the country found that black drivers are stopped more often than white drivers. They're also about twice as likely to be searched by police. Jennifer Eberhardt is one of the world's leading experts on unconscious racial bias. She has conducted training sessions with law enforcement for nearly 15 years now on how bias influences their behavior. Her new book is called Bias: Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do. In it, she explains how all of us are vulnerable to racial bias. Jennifer Eberhardt joins us at the table to discuss. Jennifer, you said we all have it, we all do it, and we're afraid to admit it because we don't want people to think we are racist.
Yes, that's right. I think typically when people think about bias, they're thinking about burning crosses and people filled with hate, but you don't have to be a bigot to have bias. Bias is affecting all of us. You don't have to be a bad person. And in fact, bias is not so much a stable trait, but it's something that can be triggered by the situations we find ourselves in. Mm-hmm. And some situations make us more vulnerable to bias and acting on that bias than others.
You tell a great story about your young son, who is a little boy of color.
Yes.
That even he had racial bias at a young age on a plane.
Right, that's true. He was 5 years old, and we were on the plane together, and he's looking around. He's all wide-eyed. He's excited about being on the plane with mommy, and then he sees this guy, and he says, "Hey, that guy looks like Daddy."
Yeah.
And I look at the guy, and he doesn't look anything at all like Daddy. I mean, like nothing.
But then what he says next was so surprising.
Yeah. It turns out he was the only black guy on the plane. And so I thought I was going to have a conversation with him about how not all black people look alike.
Because he was worried that the black guy
Exactly.
was going to rob the plane.
He was worried that the black guy was going to rob the plane.
Right.
And so I just, I looked at him and I said, well, why would you think that? And he said to me, I don't know why I was thinking that. I don't know why I said that.
You realize you have work to do, yeah.
Oh, definitely.
In your own house, yeah.
So, Jennifer, give people some other examples of how implicit bias creeps into their lives. As you say, even if people think, well, I'm not racist, I'm not a bigot.
Right. I mean, it can creep into our biases in our own neighborhoods and how we view people who are seen as outsiders in that neighborhood, just based on their race, maybe. People are thinking that, okay, this person is suspicious, right? So that's an example. Or in our workplace, bias can creep in how we evaluate others and how we give promotions and how we hire. Bias can creep in the educational context with teachers and evaluating students and deciding on who needs to be disciplined and how severely.
You gave an example of race playing a role in muggings among Asian women in particular.
Yeah.
And when they were trying to identify who the muggers were, they couldn't decipher between multiple African-American men.
That's right.
Right? And so this was actually used in their favor.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, it's almost as though the muggers actually had access to the science, right? And so when the police officers would catch them and ask, well, why did you go there? Why did you go to Chinatown? And why did you choose these women to rob? They said that they go there because the Asian people can't tell the brothers apart, right? They wouldn't be recognized. They couldn't be picked out.
But you say that's true in all groups, that whites recognize whites, Asians recognize Asians. It depends on the group that you're from. That's what you recognize.
That's true.
We don't all look alike to each other.
We don't. And actually, babies as young as 3 months of age already are showing a preference for faces of their own race. So this starts early. I mean, it has to do with who we're surrounded by, and our brains get conditioned to looking at those faces and being able to distinguish among them.
So, Jennifer, how do you unwire the brain? What you're describing sounds so hardwired, even from the infant stage.
But the wiring comes from experience. That's the whole thing, right? So if you have a social experience where we're living with each other and we're not living in segregated spaces, say, and you're exposed to faces of other races all the time, then your brain gets tuned up to that. So it's flexible, even though, it's something that is, it's wired in, but it's a flexible wiring.
So how do you bring this science, as you have, to police departments across the country as we continue to see this wave of white police officers shooting many times unarmed black men?
Right. So I've worked with a number of different police departments. I haven't worked with them around use of force, but what I've done is gone in as a subject matter expert to analyze data on stops and searches. And so that's where my focus has been. And I'm in Oakland, California right now, working with the department there on their reform efforts and trying to figure out a way to decrease the number of stops of African Americans in particular who ultimately are not committing a crime, and we've been figuring out together how to do that.
And you point out that 99% of the police stops do not result in deadly force.
Right.
Which I thought was a very important point to make.
Right. That's true. I mean, most of us come into contact with the police during routine traffic stops, and so a lot of my research focuses on that.
Yeah, she said 1 in 3 people have been stopped by police while driving. Anybody at the table? Stop. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think it's 3 for 3.
Yes.
Thank you,
Jennifer Eberhardt, thank you. Great to have you at the
You had to
table.
think about it.
Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I'm in denial.
Well, we should say that Bias is on sale tomorrow.